Excited to be here today on the St. Patrick's Day of 2022. We're going to be sharing some more stories of organizations and their responses and communities and their responses to the events in December that affected so many towns and cities and rural communities all across Western and Central Kentucky. As we know, the damages of those 2 days in December were not just during those 2 days, but they created an aftermath of even more problems for many homes and businesses. And so today we're going to hear the story of the African American Museum of the Bowling Green area and how our community came together to recover cultural collections and treasures after the tornado and a fire. First, I'd like to start by talking with two of our guests, Maxine Ray and Wathetta Buford, and would just like to learn more about how you and your community helped to establish the African American Museum. If we could start with Maxine Ray, whom I met back in the late 1990s. We were graduate students together at Western Kentucky University Folk Studies Department. And Maxine, could you talk about how your research and documentation on the Black communities of Bowling Green led you toward studying folklore?
Yes, I am a folklorist and a community scholar, and I'm on the board of the African American Museum. And one day I was in a class, in one of my classes, and I had showed one of my professors some of the pictures that I had from my family and all. And he had asked me then, did I know what I have? And I said, yes, I think I do. So from then on, I started doing documentations of our family. And then after I got with the museum, we started, I guess, back in about 2000. No, in 2000, I was still in school. But we used to go to the folklore fair in Frankfort, Kentucky. And at that fair, that was where we had learned how to do, where we worked in it. I worked in it for 2 years. And that taught us how to set up our stages and how to do stage presentations and different things. And then we began, after I finished that, about the year of 2000, I think it was, we started locally trying to organize our museum, and different people have been on the board and some have left, but then we had always, a lot of the people in Bowling Green too, had a lot of, not just us, but different people had been collecting histories of the Black history of Bowling Green. So after we were, I guess it was about 2010 or 2011 was when Wathetta and I had gotten together and started to ask for a museum in Bowling Green. And we made all the people that were running for election, we made all of their meetings and all. And so we just started asking around. And at that time, it was kind of a slow process, but then it finally picked up, and we finally got a building, and we started from there, slow but still steady. That we were working and collecting a lot of this history of Bowling Green. So during my last year, after I graduated from Folk Studies Department and working in my master's, I had a project, we all had a project to do. And so the one that I was interested in was documentation of the Jonesville community that was once located on the campus. And that was a year, 2 operation to get that started and to get that going. Before I was in that class, there were 2 students that had already wrote the nomination for the historic district and the Shake Rag district. And so when I came in, I knew some of the people that lived in the neighborhood. They were wanting information about the neighborhood, but that neighborhood was the one that I didn't know much about. I did go to school there in that neighborhood, but that was all. So my job at that time was to gather up some of the people that lived in the neighborhood and knew the history of the neighborhood. So we did that. And then I guess that's all I say right now. Let somebody else talk to.
Thanks. That's a good overview, Maxine. It gives us a sense of how you applied your research and the topics that you were passionate about toward extending your education and becoming qualified as a folklorist, getting all those skills that you learned at the Kentucky Folklife Festival, and being able to apply that to a new institution in Bowling Green. And if we could turn it over to Wathetta Buford now to talk about meeting Maxine or working with Maxine on establishing the museum and documenting the Shake Rag community. Could you talk about that for a while?
I sure could. Yes, Maxine and I, our families have known each other forever, but
Yes.
early 2000s, a group got together to try to restore the Shake Rag area in Bowling Green. And we were part of that group. And we got to, preserve and restore the area. We started collecting stuff, talking to people, getting pictures, going to meetings, trying to get them to save property that the city was getting ready to tear down. And during that time, I was traveling with the Visitors Bureau here in Bowling Green as a consultant to their African American conferences to try to get them to come to Bowling Green. Well, each conference I would go to, they would say, do you have an African American museum? And we'd say, no. There's one in Franklin, there's one in Russellville, but we don't have one in Bowling Green. And that went on for about 2 years. And so Maxine and I got our heads together and we thought, well, we need to talk to the city commission and tell them that we need a museum here in Bowling Green. And that's what we started doing. As Maxine said, we met with election for people running for office. We went to the city commission meetings. Everybody knew us because we were very visible. Finally, one person found us a building and we started from there. And we had been collecting materials and pictures and interviewing people, 6, 7, 8 years. So we had a lot of stuff. And once we got the building and we got the museum started, then we got more people interested in what we were doing. It's been very interesting because until I got with Maxine and the group, I wasn't interested in folklore, history, anything. I'm a business major, business administration major. So that wasn't even, I couldn't even think of doing that. But I became very, very interested thanks to Maxine. So that's basically how we started.
Well, it's been great getting to know you as a community scholar over the years, and it's really amazing what you all have collected and presented at the African American Museum. Could you talk a little bit about, before we turn it over to Brent, I wanted to hear just about some of your collections there at the museum. What are some of your prized pieces, whether that's photos or documents or artifacts? Could you talk a little bit about that? And that's for either one of you, if you'd like to talk about collections at the African American Museum.
Okay, if Wathetta may be having trouble right now with her Zoom or whatever, but at the museum, we have our biggest collection is our military room. We have pictures, we have collected pictures of people in Bowling Green that had been in the military, that had served in the military. And all of the ones we've contacted have been very good about getting us their pictures of them in their uniforms and everything. And we even have a uniform of one of the Vietnam veterans. And we have all of his awards too. We have some people, with Purple Hearts, and one family presented us with their brothers, all of his awards, his Purple Hearts, and in his pictures too. And we also have several female that have brought their pictures up, and shared that with us. So that one is our biggest display, our biggest room, and it has the biggest display in there. Go ahead, Wathetta.
We also have several pictures of people that attended Western that were like the first African-American homecoming queen, the basketball players that some of the first that played for Western, people that were the first to work at Western, the lady that was the first African-American to graduate from Western. So that's one of our collections that's real good too. Also, we have a lot of pictures and plaques from the African-American high schools or schools that were in Bowling Green. So we have quite a bit.
That's great. And now that we have kind of an understanding of the African American Museum and really its critical importance for just not just Bowling Green, but the whole region, could we hear from Brent Bjorkman now? Brent is the director of the Kentucky Folklife Program in the Kentucky Museum, and he's going to share some visuals about what happened after the tornadoes in December and the days that followed.
Sure.
So
Thanks.
Brent, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And, like you, Mark, I'm also a folklorist as a disciplinarian, and telling that story through ethnography and oral histories. And you heard from both Wathetta and Maxine, it's been a passion for all our lives. So as Mark illustrated, we've all been friends and colleagues in one way or another for about 20 years. And I think this process about this multifaceted recovery process that I'm about to share, I also wanted to say that Lexi and Nance in the last session about the Ice House, there's a lot of connections and community vitality that's been happening. So that's what I'm going to share. Things that happened in December and just a little bit of who was involved and how the community got behind that. So I'll do can I do a screen share now? Yes. Yeah, it was. So let me start right in. December 11th, as you know, as our Mayfield and Paducah friends know, Western Kentucky folks know, the tornado that came in was pretty devastating. We were Bowling Green was one of several communities that was hit. This is an image of the Bowling Green African American Museum of the Bowling Green area that was really spearheaded by my colleagues here, Wathetta and Maxine. And this is some of the tornado damage that happened on that day. You can see it's a bit problematic. You can see some trees down, but it didn't do massive devastating. So it is on the campus of Western Kentucky University, and Wathetta and her colleagues, her board colleagues, so they rent this from us, or at least this space from us, meaning me, because I'm based at the university right now. And it's certainly, if you take a look, you can see that there's no major structural damage. The roof is not off, comparably to, like, say, the Ice House or other buildings and neighborhoods on in our community or in Paducah or elsewhere. So we were very hopeful for this. The grounds people, facilities at the university, you can see they boarded up some windows. They were starting to remove some trees and that sort of thing. And then on December 22nd, power was restored, but there was some bad wiring and a fire ensued on that Wednesday, right before Christmas. So I'm sharing some images that were taken there. On that day, Wathetta was contacted me right away after she heard. It all was very sudden, of course, as fires are. Also, John Harden, who's the board member, their chair of the board at the African American Museum, he was on site because he was in town. We were talking about this. On the night of the fire department did put out the main blaze. They put out the blaze, and in the main room where there was the water saturated things, they brought those outside, and facilities on campus, with the help of David Oliver on our campus, brought them to our service and supply building, and just to house them for now until we started thinking a little bit more about how we were going to go about doing this triage. At that time, I'll show that, excuse me. A couple more images of the fire damage. We assembled David Oliver's group. As I said, they brought those in, delivered them to service and supply. And the following day, a flurries of calls came in. Those are notifying me about this. And I, in turn, helped to facilitate a bunch of talented people to come into play. A lot of the Kentucky Museum staff, Mary Lynn Claycomb and Tiffany Iselhart, who's our development and marketing manager, along with our GA, our graduate assistant in folk studies. She has a museum concentration, Landon Hatch. She was helping the museum, even beginning last summer, starting to organize and assess and go through their files and make some order to some of the files and documents they had going on. So brought her in, which was a really great boon for this process, because she knew and she had intimate details about all these things she'd been working on thus far. Also, Ann Farrell of the Department of Folk Studies. And we also called in, as we were working on this, Leah Craig, who is the registrar of the Corvette Museum in town, always a partner in lots of different things. So we had a lot of waterlogged things from the initial putting out of the fire. We were able to separate some of those things, and the ones that were the worst damaged, we were able to bring them to the walk-in freezer for such an event at the Corvette Museum. So they really helped out in that way. And we had all these 8-foot tables. So we were spreading things out, as you can see here. We had about 30, 40 table, and we were trying to spread all these things out and let them dry out over the holiday weekend. That Monday, we returned to the site into the rooms that weren't as badly damaged by the water from the firemen. And we were able to recover, for instance, lots of their library books and those types of pieces of documentation. Again, some of our staff was there. John Harden was also there, and Landon was there as well. And we transferred some of those things back over to this holding area. We were working on this recovery. We were working through our museum's disaster plan. So we were trying to keep best practices going. Nothing like a baptism by fire, I guess, to really put in place a disaster during the disaster plan during a disaster. So then we boxed up the things that had been drying for about 5 or 6 days and started with the other things and spreading those out. So making some assessments that we had done. We were talking about Mark was asking Wathetta and Maxine about what was in the collections, and you can see here some of the collections as well. You can see some of the uniforms that Maxine had talked about as part of their military room, but also some really vintage photographs. And we actually have some tin types that are very precious from the turn of the last century that we were working toward helping to dry out thoroughly and that sort of thing. So some smoke damage, trying to assess those kinds of things, but getting it really dried out and working forward with that. Certainly, we're talking about, us as folklorists And as museum folks, we're interested in art history and culture, I think, if that's safe to say, colleagues. So it's the documents and all the historical information, but also the artwork that you see. Here's some representative pieces of that as well that we were loading. Pictures, trying to take things that were kind of waterlogged out of antique frames and making sure that they were preserved as well. Again, following the plan going forward and reboxing these kinds of things. What was determined was, where are these things going to go? And one of the things that we determined was they were going to go to the conservation lab, at least temporarily, at the Kentucky Museum. At the Kentucky Museum, all the boxes came over here and fully dried out. So now, I mentioned Landon Hatch before. She has been doing her capstone. Her capstone this spring was supposed to take place at the African American Museum to continue her work on categorizing and thematically organizing this further, the lifelong work that Wathetta and Maxine have been doing. But so she, in a sense, she really could continue that. She was just doing it in a different place in this conservation lab that you see. So you can see some of the same images from our initial site being redeposited here. So that's being worked on this spring semester. A couple of the things that I can go into this, but certainly I can, would love if my colleagues wanted to chime in either now or a little bit later. Straight away, I mentioned Tiffany Iselhard, who's our development person here. She's also a museum professional. She went straight away and did a GoFundMe page for this tornado relief. And that's been working well. It continues to grow, and we're hoping it does. And I think Maxine and Wathetta can talk a little bit more too. People are actually sending checks forward, and those are very much needed as well. So in addition to that, when we're talking about conservation, I told you about all the help that we had from the facilities, our environmental and safety person, David Oliver, the Department of Folk Studies and Anthropology, also Library of Special Collections, who we share the building with. Joe Shankweiler came over, who's a rare book specialist, and we were able to talk about the process of recovering things and taking things safely out of frame. So, again, I guess I helped to lead this, but really it was all the people on the ground that had all that know-how, which was what was great. Like I said, Corvette Museum was able to take some things away. The GoFundMe initiative that's still ongoing. Also, Tiffany went ahead and worked with the Foundation for Advancement of Conservation and got an Emergency Collections Assessment Preservation Grant, a CAP grant, which you'll see here. So one of those things that's going to allow us to do, or them to do, they're going to be coming into this lab that I just showed you. And Wathetta is working really directly with Landon, as is Maxine, looking at those things. So they're having a professional that's, even more well-versed in these kinds of things come in for a multi-day assessment. So then we can kind of know where we are, where the museum is, where it needs to go as far as further asking for funds to particular granting organizations and that sort of thing. That's actually going to be happening, I believe, at the end of next week. So those things are in motion as well, which is very exciting to the process. Maybe it's time to have my colleagues comment a little bit. I did maybe want to talk about a project that is ongoing, and it has to do with the Jonesville project that Mark Brown here is also spearheading along with us, a community scholars project. But maybe it's time for me to draw a breath a little bit and find out if somebody would like to fill in something that I've forgotten. I'm sure there's crucial things that I'll be kicking myself for forgetting.
I will start. First, I want to go back and say that I want to thank all of the partners that came in and helped to get our artifacts and take them wherever they need to take them. I happened to be out of town doing all of this. So one of the first persons that I thought about calling was Brent. And I thank him for being there and doing what he did. at first, when I was told about the fire, I was imagining and seeing pictures, they were sending me pictures. I was imagining that everything got burned, that it was really just a total loss. But it's amazing how many artifacts that we still have. And hopefully, once the assessor comes, and Brent, that's going to be April, the April
Thank you.
21st and 22nd. Yes.
Sure.
Once she gets here and we work with her, we'll know exactly how much we have to work with. But I'm thinking we have a lot to work with. And once we have a place enough to have a museum again. So basically that's it for me.
I'd like to say too that I really appreciate everything that everybody has done to help us to save our collection, to look for places, helping us look for other places to go to open up an office right now. I've at the time that the tornado and the fire was happening, I was out of town too. I left town the day after the storm and I didn't come back until New Year's Eve. So I was on the phone just as much as Wathetta trying to see what was happening and what's going on. So, but we really do. We appreciate everything everybody has done, the money that they have given, the volunteer services that they have given, and we gonna come back. I'm always thinking positive, and I think by this time next year we will be back in our building and all of that. But yeah, it's been kind of challenging, but we're really proud of the things that we have done in the museum and with the museum. We have 4 main rooms. That was the military room, the WKU room, and we have educational room, and we have a community room that's set up in the museum. And we just I know it'll be back, but this time next year we will probably be reporting to you all when we're gonna have our ribbon cutting and open in day again. But we are go here what
And we also have a library thanks to the graduate assistant Landon. And she has organized those books. And I think a lot of those books have been saved. So we're very appreciative to her.
To everyone.
I was just thinking that was really inspiring to hear about how all the the community of museum professionals came together, and they identified a need there and were willing to step in. I was wondering, with your all's emergency planning, if y'all had, did you know about the Corvette Museum's freezer? Was that like on a list of assets somewhere, or was that part of your plan that if anything ever happened that you'd be able to contact them, or did this relationship with the Corvette Museum form, when at the time that it was needed?
It formed at the time it was needed. I received a phone call from a lady that I used to work with that works at the Corvette Museum. And she had told me that Leah Craig, who is the lady that has our stuff in the freezer, wanted me to call her, wanted to contact her, because if she wanted us to know that we could use her freezer. So me still being out of town, I called Brent and told him Leah was wanting, to us to be able to use her freezer. And they made the contact. And that's how we were able. We have 4 boxes of pictures and newspapers and a lot of paperwork there. But we will be going when the assessor comes out to see if those things are okay for us to take. So.
Great. And I wondered too, how did going through this pretty traumatic experience, did it affect your understanding or your priorities as far as emergency planning? Or I guess what do you think, what would you say to other organizations who may not have an emergency plan or are thinking about getting one?
That yes, they need to get one. That is
Yeah.
something we need to do. We have learned so much through this
Mhm.
that things that we didn't even know. Of course, starting the museum was something new for me and Maxine.
Yeah.
And so, although it was a serious thing that happened, we are learning so much that we need to know, and we're trying to put all that stuff in place so things won't happen like they did this time. We could be able to maybe have a team of professionals that we know we can call on that partner with us, like knowing that there's a freezer at that museum, different things. We'll put all these things down and know that we can utilize those services.
That's great.
Yeah.
Brent, would you like to talk about the Kentucky Museum, which has American Association of Museums certification? Part of that process is preparing an emergency plan. And you said that you followed that when you were assisting with the African American Museum. Could you talk about your plan? What did it take to put that together, and how did it benefit you all?
Sure. Yes, we are. We don't have it. We're hopefully on the last legs in the next year here to achieve AAM, American Alliance of Museum accreditation status. But any accreditation status, if people out there listening that are part of a museum, it's a real look at a self-reflective look about how you do processes. And they want you to have everything. They want an emergency plan, but they also want disaster plans and that sort of thing. So you have to start producing those things to be able to achieve this accreditation. So that's a plan that was put into place. But again, I think Wathetta just said it as well. Yes, we're learning as much as we can. It was in place, but when you put it into practice, it's something you're learning. Is that the right plan for you? What are we learning from this? So it's a bit of a baptism by fire. I think that's also part of our assessment. How successful was it? Did we do the right things? And I think when the initial conservator that's coming at the end of next month, thank you, Wathetta, when they come in too, that'll be a point of conversation as well. What kinds of things were done correctly, I'm hoping. What kinds of things need a little bit more help or need a little bit more polishing as far as that goes. So again, both Maxine and they're talking about how do we stay really positive with this thing. We learn as we go. I think we learned what our process was as helpmates. They're learning about their museum. We're learning about our processes as well. And being able to learn from that and grow from that. And also bringing all these people together, everybody from the Corvette Museum to the group of people, my colleagues on campus. John Harden helped from the board's perspective. And of course, Wathetta and Maxine, we're all learning together, but we're also learning what kind of strengths we all have and what we can contribute in the future. I'm thinking as we go for grant, if they go for grant funding, maybe we become a partner in that or vice versa. How can we tell this larger community story, in this case, more about the African-American community in South Central Kentucky? How can we tell it in a more robust way? Continuing the robust way that Maxine really began with her research and got Wathetta interested, and those two tag teamed on getting city officials engaged with this important story needs to be told. So moving forward, it's the making lemonade out of the lemons, I guess, is what I'm trying to say too. So if that's helpful.
Definitely. And I'd like to invite, I have one question, and at this, right before I ask it, I'd like to invite people who are on the call, whether you're on the Zoom call or on Facebook, to type a comment, type a question for us if you'd like to learn more about the museum and their response to the disaster and the community's response. But I wanted to ask, we're hearing a story about a strong relationship here, one that has kind of been built over time. And could you talk about some of the things that were happening even right before the tornadoes, with the Kentucky Museum and the African American Museum, the art projects, Fresco with Alice Gatewood Waddell, and where those collaborations are leading coming up in this next year?
Sure. I have a couple images. If I could screen share the last couple images, and then I could have my colleagues help to fill in our process. Would that be all right?
Be great.
So once again, I'm going to do it. Mark, you alluded to it. There's the Kentucky website right there. So last summer, there was a fresco that was initiated in the lobby of the Kentucky Museum. Mike Nichols, who's our fresco master, wonderful fresco painter and an art department faculty member, we asked him to do this, and the theme was to be about community and thinking about what does that mean. A mural is supposed to depict something very important, seminal to what your community is about, and we really needed to brainstorm what this meant. So the idea was to bring in somebody who was thoughtful about community on the same wavelength as a lot of us. And we brought in Alice Gatewood Waddell, who is also a friend of my colleagues here as well, to be able to vision what could we do to talk about community and sense of community, or loss of sense of community, perhaps. So the idea was all my colleagues here, and also including Alice, have this connection to Jonesville. Jonesville, for you that don't know, in a nutshell, and I hope I'm telling this right, was an African-American community that started in Bowling Green, within Bowling Green after the Civil War. Very successful African-American community that was in the 1960s was demolished to make way for WKU's expansion. So it's a hard story to hear. It's a hard story to tell. There's a lot of shame in it from a majority of people that live in this community. But it was a great way to think about how can we share this story larger through the arts. And so Mike and Alice spearheaded that this summer, went through the fresco process with 3 wonderful students. Excuse me, you can see them here. And we're able to do that. It's really a springboard to be able to talk about this in a thoughtful way. There's a lot of professor colleagues on our campus that are interested in using this in their coursework. But one of the things that we had been talking about was how could this springboard into something like a community scholars program? How could we get more documentation building on the great work that Maxine and Wathetta had done about Shake Rag, about Jonesville, about African-American communities in general? How could we get community members to take the training that Mark and the Arts Council and Folklife Program have done for 20 years to teach people oral history techniques and go out into their own community? Now, granted, one of the things that Maxine and I and Wathetta have been talking about, people that were displaced from homes in the 60s, they're probably not alive anymore, but certainly their families are. So what are those family narratives? How do they drive life, and how do they drive how we move in communities? How does that influence us? So Mark has been involved, and Mark, I'm putting words in all of your mouths right now, had done some community scholars training work at the African American Museum in the past. I think the last one was in 2019, but now we're going to begin next week with a handful of community scholars who are interested in learning how to document the techniques of folklorists and community scholars. So we have the 4 of us, and Farrell also from the department is involved in this. Alice is also involved in this. And we're going to be teaching oral history techniques over the 12-week, every other week, 6-session thing, and going to go out and get those stories And the outcome will be, of course, the research, which we can house in the library, and it can be reached out and sought after in years to come about the African American, building on things that Maxine has done, building on things that Wathetta has done. But also, we're hoping it will be resulting in an exhibit, a movable pop-up exhibit, where we can share the findings. And then in the fall of this year, the hope is to have a symposium where these scholars that have been working on their own communities that they're connected to, they can be guided by Maxine, by Wathetta, by Alice, by Anne, by myself, by Mark, and others, to talk about this. And what was that experience even doing that work? And how does this take us forward? What are the questions that can help answer by doing this intimate work? So that's in a nutshell what we're hoping is going to come out of this. So again, I think it's a hopeful thing that was actually going on, pushing forward before our tornado and our fire and those sorts of things. But again, it's maybe it enhanced the collaboration of the recovery effort. Certainly in my mind, the recovery effort was going to go on with our partners anyway, but it's part of the mix of how we're moving forward. And my hope is that this can also help the African American Museum and all the different things that they're thinking about, all the things that they're thinking about now, things that might unfold from that, different ways that we can deliver the message, and they can continue to grow. We mentioned that building was on campus. I don't think we mentioned about this. So Maxine and Wathetta and I and John Harden on their board, we've learned that they are rebuilding it, and we're very excited about that. I know they're excited about that, when they could possibly get back in. So whether there's some temporary housing here as they get themselves back on their feet, but how can we make that Erskine house that was their place and they're going to go back into, how can we just make that continue to be a wonderful venue for learning more?
Yeah.
Did I talk too much for y'all?
That was
No.
perfect, Brent.
No, that's good. But Mark, too, another thing about our museum, we have a good working relationship with the WKU history department, because we have some professors that bring their classes down there each semester. And Wathetta can probably tell you more about that, with the, working with them, and because she guides their program too. But we have a good relationship with the history department, and the students are very excited about coming down and learning about that history, because they just can't imagine houses, being in that area where the community was. And Wathetta making add something else to it that I've left out.
No, that is so true. Also, we have a working relationship with the city of Bowling Green that brings one of their senior citizens program, say about 20 some people once a year, through there for tours and education. And then also with one of the after school programs in Bowling Green, they bring their children there. So our working relationships with the city and with Western is pretty good.
Yeah. And Brent was talking about the the people that were left now from Jonesville. My generation is going to be the last generation that will know that had lived in the community, or that would really know firsthand about that community. And my generation now, we are already 76, 80 years old. So we are really, hoping to keep the history about it alive, and it will be, it will stay alive. We do have a state historical marker there on Western's campus, denoting the community and the people that lived in that community, and some of the jobs and things that they had. So that's my fight in it, to keep it alive, keep the story alive as long as I'm living.
Yeah. And I think this is all kind of, it makes it really clear about how important it is to have a space, right? To share,
Yes.
to not only collect all these treasures,
Uh-huh.
but also to have a place to share it, to have people to come and visit you, you know, as
Yes.
the space was literally taken away
Yeah.
from the community, to be able to have some real estate, some real territory there to call home, to operate as a home base for the stories. And we have one question from the chat here. The museum has so many different types of materials in its collections, you know, like we've mentioned, photos, ethnographic research, artifacts, and more. How did you decide what type of conservator should come to visit and do an assessment? And what would be the conservator's specialty?
Okay.
This person
The,
asks.
the lady that's coming specializes in fire damage. And fire damage, smaller museums and photographs and historic paperwork and stuff like that. So that's why we chose her. Now, she may not know, we need to ask questions about what do we do with some of the uniforms that were damaged, but we feel like she could tell us. If she doesn't know, she could tell us who to go to.
What are some of the topics that you all are really interested in learning more about now? You know, that we've kind of focused a couple of our presentations today on the tornadoes. Is there anything that you're gonna try to learn more about for, you know, being prepared, or for creating a stronger like home base for your collections for the near and distant future?
Maxine, are you answering?
Oh, we can just work on what we have, develop it more. We still have we do have one class out of the folk studies department too that works with us. We work with Dr. Tim Evans in one of his classes that he taught. So we had some good volunteers and ideas and things from those students. And we're going to try to continue developing some of their ideas and things. We would just go forward in it and try to, you know, develop more exhibits. And I know we do have one room that we do change out, so we can develop more exhibits for that room. And we also can we'll just know next time if this ever happens again, we'll know which way to go and what to do, and be you know, ready for it.
Yes.
If it happens.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank, go ahead. I wanted to thank all three of you for joining the conversation today, Brent, Wathetta, and Maxine. And I want to encourage everyone to, you know, look up these organizations and see what they're doing. The African American Museum of the Bowling Green area, the Kentucky Folklife Program, and the Kentucky Museum. There's exciting things, you know, coming out of these relationships in Bowling Green and the surrounding communities. And would invite everyone to, you know, get in touch and learn more, see how you can get involved or become a supporter. And we have, it's probably a good time now to turn over, but any closing thoughts from our three panelists here today?
I'd just like to say thank you for having us. It's been wonderful. I'm sorry that I hadn't been able to get on to the rest of the conference, but here again, I'm out of town again, so.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I was
Oh.
just going to say thank you to everyone, and thank you for having us and helping us to get our history out there.
Yeah. And thanks to the Arts Council, to the Kentucky Arts Council, for all the things they do for all of us, Secretary Barry, and bringing us all together here. I too was traveling a little bit, but as I shared, I did catch by Lexi and Nance, the last session about the ice house and just that idea of community coming together. And also I did catch a little bit of the home exhibit that you were talking about, bringing together our Hispanic professors and our artists. It just seems like we're all doing important things. And I think that's what our lives are really based on and dedicated to. And I'm glad that the Arts Council, sees that, brings us all together and tries to help us do a better job in allowing us to do what we do. So thank you all.